So good afternoon from Alpha Software here in Boston, and welcome to today's webinar, An Introduction to the Alpha 5 Development Environment. I'm Dave McCormick from Alpha Software, and I'm joined here today by Doran Farber of Farber Consulting Group and Jim Dusso of NetData Design Innovations. Both are Alpha 5 experts and have decades of experience as professional application developers. So thanks for joining us, and to begin I'd like to introduce Jim Dusso, who will start us out with some examples of what's possible in Alpha 5. Hi, Jim.
Well, welcome everybody. We've got a lot of information to cover, so we're going to go at a fairly fast pace today. So this is an example of a simple registration screen where we capture the basic information. And then once that's been done, the user can then log in. And I want to just give you an idea of how rich an interface you can build, as long as we get to the right record here. There we go. So once a user is registered, we give them the ability to manage their profile, and as you'd expect, we have text fields to collect the information, but it also gives us the ability to upload photos. We can create an interface that manages multiple addresses, various types of contact information. In addition to a picture, we might want to upload information like the passport image, and we drill down into it to get a larger version of that. We can create, again, multiple records for their employment, etc. Now this is all built with practically no code. This is all using primarily Alpha's builders for grids and dialogues and reports. Here's another application that we built for Thomson Reuters, which was a proof of concept for a sales management system. What's interesting about this, and we're going to get into this a little bit more later on, one of the core building blocks of Alpha is a grid. Now, if you've built on any other platform, a grid is basically cells, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet, columns and rows, that displays information, or maybe you can edit some of that data. But the Alpha grid is much more powerful, and what we're looking at here is an example of several different types of grids all on the same screen. So in this case, we have this one little record here is a grid, and the reason we've done that is that we can link content with that one piece of information to child records for that particular company. I've logged in here. The system knows who I am, and based on that, all the data that we're going to be looking at here is filtered on the fact that I belong to this organization. This section here is a grid. This area here is part of a grid where we've incorporated a third-party tool called Fusion Charts that allows us to create very sophisticated and high-quality presentation tools. Allows us to explode the pie slices of the whole bit. And we are actually running against live data. When you saw this come up, it's extremely fast. So I think one of the things you'll be pleased with Alpha, if you've configured things properly, you're going to be very happy with the performance. Then we get into the idea of, again, another type of grid layout. One of the things that we do in our designs very often is use multiple lines, which can be kind of difficult to do in some platforms. But this allows us to delineate the data a little bit better, makes it very clear. We also provide the search capabilities right in that grid component. We can quickly filter on, in this case, case types. So if we want to look at all the employment cases, we click on that, hit search, and we're immediately updated with the records that meet that criteria. Alpha also allows you to build in links, for instance, the mail links here. This could be a website, this could be a link to another page, it could be a link to a web service, whatever. Things like emails and websites, again, require no coding. It's built into the configuration of the grid. One of the other things that Alpha does extremely well is manage your conditional displays. It gives you the ability to conditionally display, in this case, every record that has a value over $35,000 is highlighted in red. using CSS, the cascading style sheets, and that in inline styling, we can make very tailored interfaces for the various users. You have complete control over the look and feel and layout of your system. This is another completely different layout. In this case, this is a customer that rents a space for events located in New York. What I'm going to do, I'm going to show all these records. Besides the search that we just looked at, Alpha gives the ability to do a very quick search, which you can customize to search on specific fields in your database. In this case, we're just searching on name, so if we go to find a customer, there it is, that's the one we're looking for. And of course, one of the requirements of many applications is the ability to show data that's related to a parent table. In this case, the customer table can then expand and show all of the events, and then we can continue to nest what Alpha calls row expanders, and the event then has multiple grids that are associated with the various parts of this event, in this case the rental, the services, and payments. What I'd like to point out here is that you can nest these row expanders at many levels as you want. There's no real technical limitation. Practically speaking, if you go too far, things get a little cluttered. But again, you have control of that layout, and Alpha gives you some other paradigms as to whether you use this row expander, or you can pop up a screen using a JavaScript window, or again, a number of different ways to show the data. One other thing that you can take advantage of, which is very powerful, these buttons at the bottom are called action buttons. This allows you to write any arbitrary code to perform any kind of function, whether it's some JavaScript on the page on the client side, or doing an AJAX callback to run some complex process on your database, or again call a web service, or whatever you'd like to do. In this case, this client, their invoices are basically pro forma invoices. It's not an accounting system. So in their process, they had multiple invoices to generate. They've got the rental invoice, the services invoice, and then after an event, they have added services. In addition to that, they build a proposal and a contract. Each of those have slightly different layouts. So I want to show you what can be built in the Alpha Report Writer. And this is a simple contract. And as you can see, we can incorporate a cover letter, or cover page rather. And then what you'd expect to see on any report writer, the columns and rows. And if you notice, we also can put in group headers and breaks, subtotals and totals, calculate taxes, show the tax rate. But then we also get into printing the rest of the contract, which is boilerplate text that can be built out of templates that you create in your database. All the way down to the last page in this particular contract, where we're embedding an image showing the layout of the space that's being rented. Let's jump over to another application. This is a inquiry case management system. As you can see, this is a very dense and complex page. One of the paradigms that you might want to consider as you're building apps is, rather than try to go with the what I would consider kind of the standard web interface, where we have a row, and in this case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 buttons, and have those repeated on every row. You might want to build something that's more like a desktop interface, which is what we've done here. Because Alpha is structured to be very data aware, it knows that as we move from row to row, we know what row we're on. So for instance, if you notice this particular row here, there was a button that appeared once we go to a different row, because based on parameters here. This is part of that show hide capability. So every time we make a change, the system knows that it has to update these buttons, whether or not you have access to them. And by clicking on these buttons, then we open up another section of the system. We perform some function. We do a callback. whatever it is we want to do. If you notice, we've also embedded a third-party control. This again is Fusion Charts, which I mentioned earlier, which allows a user to very quickly get an overview of information. In this case, they're looking at top 10 cases, top 10 case types for each year. But some of you may, if you've been experimenting with Alpha already, you may know that Alpha's got some very sophisticated mapping capabilities. This section of the system is a complex mail shot type of system where, based on these filters, we can get various groups of people we want to mail to, incorporate it into a single mailing, and then we take a quick look at where they're located. And we get a map of all of those, in this case, constituents that are related to their members of parliament. Another section we've got here has to do with a client that had a no-interest loan management. Duran, I'm going to have you go over this and explain some of how this operates.
Yeah, this is designed for a quick data entry form to save time, so you don't need to go through different navigation screens. So, and also, let's enter in here the loan number 1111. Can you enter that, Jim?
Sure.
And here we are validating that particular field, and Alpha actually helps us with basically no line of code to validate the loan number, and basically it tells us this is the wrong loan number. Let's enter another loan, let's say 6891. And basically, this loan is validated, and basically we get the name and the address, and we have the opportunity to enter the check number and the amount. But if you click, if you click the envelope in here, you can change the address on the fly, basically. And this is a pop-up which Alpha provides you the capability with no line of code, basically, to create it on the fly. So let's click on the campus in here and change the address to make that as a primary address. And click Save. And on the fly, as you see in the main grid entry, the address was changed to the new address. Let's enter the amount, let's say for $500, and pay attention, the new balance will be changed right on the fly. And now it shows $7,000. So the user has the capability to do a quick entry in here and then post it when he gets to 10 records. This is the amazing capability that Alpha provides you with basically minimum line of codes. Jim, you want to pursue further? Let's talk about. Okay, go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
Alpha provides us the Ajax code. Basically, this is a code. This is a process that, from the client to the database, we can actually exchange code and grab data. This is a codeless scenario. Basically, that Alpha generates the code for us. We can create a stored procedure to bring the data and then show the data immediately. And this is all built in Alpha without writing any line of code. You can. You want to add something else?
No, I think the thing to bear in mind is that because of the flexibility of the platform, I think you get the idea that we can provide for those that have heavy data entry needs, we can build a very efficient heads-down, keyboard-only entry, or we can provide things like these pop-ups, or what I want you to walk away with here is the idea that you've got a tremendous flexibility.
That was basically a type of a spreadsheet that every user actually used to work with it, so that's what we developed it.
So again, we have various login screens, we've got various layouts for data entry, we've got layouts for managing very complex and very dense applications. A whole different look and feel where we're maximizing screen real estate at the top. One of the things I didn't mention about the Thomson Reuters piece is that we had to match their application layout internally, and one of the things they were very pleased with was the fact that we were able to take their graphics elements and incorporate it into the application, and came up with something that matched everything they had already built. And of course, all the colors and styles and everything is completely you're able to do whatever you want with that. So let's dive into some of the whole Alpha paradigm of development, because I think this is one of the more difficult things that new developers to Alpha wrestle with. Alpha's paradigm is slightly different than what you may be used to on other platforms. I'm hoping this diagram will help give you a little picture of how we view Alpha. Alpha kind of sits in the middle of everything you need to do. From a technical perspective, Alpha is really that middle tier in an N-tier architecture. The browser has become our presentation layer. The Alpha becomes there's a little bit of a crossover between the business rules and the database, but it primarily becomes the engine for connecting to the database, and then of course we have the database backend for the for where all the information actually resides. And so Alpha provides all of these core capabilities, the IDE, all the core functions necessary to move data around, to display, build the kinds of interfaces you want, makes the database connection for you, handles all the network services. But one of the things in today's world of development is there's just way too many technologies for any one person to be expert in. So we start with our database. We've got Transact SQL, or maybe PL SQL if you use an Oracle. You have to know something about writing stored procedures and triggers. We get into the CSS, the cascading style sheets, which drives all your look and feel and colors and graphic elements. We've got HTML5, which has really changed the landscape of how we do HTML. And of course, the language of the web is JavaScript, which can be either very simple or extremely complex. And then we have XBasic itself, which is Alpha's server-side language, which I think anyone who has developed in any language before will get very comfortable with very quickly. It's a very robust, very rich language. It's been around, Alpha's been around since '82, and this language has continued to be extended for a number of years. It's very, very powerful. And which means that we can then deploy these either in a desktop. Now, when I talk desktop, even though Alpha does allow you to build standalone EXE desktop type applications, to be honest with you, there's no real strong reason to build desktop apps anymore. When we talk about desktops, we're typically talking about an intranet where you're still using web technology, but you may not be connected externally. You might not have a public-facing website. And then, of course, we build for the web, and we build for mobile. Now, Alpha 5, as it is in the current version, can do a lot of things in mobile very well. Upcoming versions of Alpha will expand on that capability and give you very strong mobile development capabilities. I think one of the most important things to consider is when we're building applications in Alpha is that Alpha is a component up versus a page down approach to development. And what I mean by that, in Alpha, well, if you've built in Expression Web or Dreamweaver or any of the web development tools, you normally would start with a page and then start dropping components on it. And with Alpha, you build small components and then ultimately drop them into some kind of a container. It might be a page, it might be a tabbed user interface, which we'll cover shortly. It might be a page layout, but some kind of a container that those components get dropped in, and then you tie them together based on the way the data is related. The way we define controls or define our layout is we choose controls, we bind it to the data, and then we start setting properties. We do not have a drag and drop WYSIWYG type of interface. However, we've found that has not been a hindrance whatsoever, because with HTML, as you know, HTML is a markup language, and so it really doesn't lend itself to WYSIWYG anyway. And so by being able to define your layouts and then hit a preview, you're able to tell very quickly whether or not you've got what you were looking for. And of course, all your control of your layout is handled through CSS style sheets. Let's talk a little bit about the database connectivity, because this is such a key piece. I know Duran and I have had conversations about this many times in the past, that one of the things that attracted us to Alpha was the ease with which we could create a connection string.
Yeah, in
Rob,
Alpha.
you can kind of cover the details on that.
Yeah, in Alpha there is one way to create a connection string, which is Alpha provides us a builder to do it very easily. Because I used to work with different platforms before, and there are 10 different ways to create connection string for the database, and sometimes it used to be confusing. In Alpha there is one way, and you can create multiple connection strings. And here it's a simple way. Let's create a simple connection string. Just go quickly and show them how easy it is.
Yeah. Let's start with a brand new connection string here.
Yeah.
So we'll give it a name. Let's call this SQL 2.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and build this. Now, as you can see, Alpha gives you the ability to connect to a number of different back-end. Alpha does a very good job in something called portable SQL. There's been a great deal of effort put into creating a SQL syntax that then gets translated for all the various flavors, whether it's MySQL, Oracle, Microsoft SQL, whatever.
If you pay attention, you also cover QuickBooks in here, which is very surprisingly nice to have that capability built in Alpha as well. So we utilize that as well.
We also pay attention to what are the current versions that are available, everything from 7.0 on up to Azure. And then we can connect either locally or to remote databases. In this case, we'll go ahead and connect locally right now. We then can test the connection. We've got a connection now.
Succeeded.
And then we can either connect via Windows authentication or through database authentication, either one. Once we've got a connection, we refresh and we get a list of all the databases that we want to that we can select from to connect to this to build this connection string.
That's basically all it is, to build a connection string. It's so simple.
So I'm just going to cancel that. Now, for those of you who might be, who may or may not have spent any time with us, the easiest way to get to that is from the web control panel under Tools, Alpha DAO connection strings. We'll take care of all that for you. Let's go ahead and talk about the various components that you have to work with here. We've mentioned multiple times the idea of a grid. The grid is one of the core components that you'd work with. I would hardly recommend learning as much as you can about a grid. Even with everything that's coming with mobile, the grid is still one of your best tools for quickly building an interface for your clients. A grid is basically made up of 3 major parts: the grid part, the search part, and the detail view. When we start defining a component, a grid component, the first thing we want to do is decide what type of component this is. Is this a tabular grid? In other words, it's the standard rows and columns, label on top, rows of data below. We can also select it in a form layout where the labels are on the left and values are on the right, or stacked columnar, which is very useful either in mobile or in situations we have limited screen real estate and need to be able to scroll up and down. We'll go ahead and work with tabular right now. And then we begin to start making some decisions. Is this a read-only grid or is it updatable? Does the grid contain a search part? And then does it have a detail view? Now, the concept of a detail view is the idea, in this case, we're looking at an event. So there's a certain amount of information we want to display to identify the event, but then there's might be pages of information that's associated with the detail of that record. So in this example we're using, this has a detail view, and that detail view is updatable. Then we start deciding where we're getting our data from. Normally, you're going to use SQL database. And by the way, let me just take a step back and mention this. Don't use the DBF tables. Although Alpha still provides the DBF option, there's no reason to use that. With free versions of various databases, MySQL is open source. There's no direct cost. Microsoft SQL provides the Express Edition, which provides significant power for a small to mid-size application.
Yeah, it is our favorite database, is Microsoft SQL, and the Express version is for free, and we use it extensively, me and Jim.
And we're going to come back and discuss a little bit about databases in just a moment here. Once we've decided where our data source is, we begin to construct the query. And that query is going to be, we have a named connection we created earlier through that process we just showed you. We connect to that named connection. It goes and then retrieves what that definition for this grid is. Alpha, you can either just select a table or use a SQL select statement. This is what we recommend doing. And there's a very comprehensive query builder that allows us to create very complex or very simple queries against the database, including doing joins. In this case, we're joining the events to the event type table. Then we can selectively choose what values or what columns we're going to display in our grid. We can, if necessary, filter. We can order this, and we can get a preview of what the data will look like. At any point, we can come down here, if we were to make a change to any of this, we can execute this query and get an idea of what results will be returned. So with all that in place, the next thing we have to decide is what fields are we going to include in our interface.
This is the property sheets here on the right, which Alpha covers for this grid. And if you look at the first one, which is called control type, it starts with the label. But here Alpha provides various type of control that you can build in within the grid. You can choose label, text box, drop down, or radio button. It depends on the scenario that you are working with. Usually the very popular is a text box, of course, but in some other cases, if you need to show multiple listing, you're going to choose a drop-down box, which is right now is highlighted. And we're going to
let's show you a little bit very quickly here. We're going to choose a drop-down box and give you, this is again a very common paradigm you're going to use. Somebody's going to make a selection from a list. Alpha gives you a number of different options on how you build that list. Very often you'll build it as a dynamic list. We're going to choose our data source. We're going to say, we're going to again use that connection string again, and then you have this builder that allows you to select whatever it is that you need to populate your drop-down with, and you have an option of what you're going to display, and potentially, and this is the pattern we use most often, is that you're going to display the value but store the ID. And this also gives you the ability, now that you've built that query, to take a look at what would be in your drop-down list, showing you the value that would be stored for each of those entries. So as you can see, this is a very powerful and easy-to-use builder. The other thing you can do is that if you have static values, January, February, etc., you can build lists, and you can save that list for reuse. But Alpha also provides you with some predefined lists, country names, their country codes, months with their month codes, state names, etc. So you can build all of these lists. If you have a number of small lists, it's probably better to build them in a list like this rather than in a table in the database. Save the overhead of having to go look that up. You also, the other thing we have is the ability to create variables. This is done when you first initialize a grid, and based, for instance, on parameters that you've picked up from the login of the user, we can then create a filtered list that would give that user's options.
Obviously, building the list into a table provides you the capability that the client on the fly can add another item into the drop-down list if need be. So that's another advantage of using that capability.
And then we get into the properties of the grid, which, as you can see, they're very extensive. We won't go over all these today. We won't have time. But the thing to understand is that you have tremendous control over your layout and design. For instance, in this case, this was set to 15. We're going to change this to 10 rows of data that are shown. We've selected a project style that's been established up here in the web actually in the project style setting. We have the option to override any JavaScript, etc. Again, I'm not going to go through all the details at this point, but all of these pieces are customizable. We're going to highlight the row when we select it, and there's places for where your title positions. You can customize your navigation look and feel. You can embed a quick search. You can link other grids. We can add those action buttons we mentioned before. So there's a rather extensive property sheet for the overall grid. If we go take a look at the working preview here, this is what this grid looks like based on the parameters that we've set. And as you can see, part of the CSS was this highlighting line because of what we selected. We're using some images here to indicate, in this case, whether or not a passport is required. That's conditionally displayed based on the event, etc. Then we get down into the search part of the grid. And here we begin to select the fields that we search on. This whole region can be laid out again however you'd like. I'm going to come back for just a second to the fields, and let's discuss very quickly an important feature in controlling your layout and design, and that's the idea of a free-form layout. This free-form layout allows you to inject any HTML you want into your layout. So since I've selected ID, I can come in here, and in my free-form layout, I'm going to use this placeholder for ID, and I can add, let's just say I'm going to just throw some dashes in there just for the fun of it. So we now have a free-form layout that we've added some text, and if we go to look at this now, you see that's now been incorporated into the grid. Now what this means is that you can add entire tables, you can do conditional formatting, you can embed some extra XBasic code to do some very sophisticated types of conditional displays and custom HTML.
Yeah, there are some additional properties in here, like show hide, for instance. Okay, show hide, and what happens is you can actually write a condition in here. Let's say that the long number is greater than 0, then show specific field, and that you can actually click on the right button and actually select the field and create the condition right on the fly. In addition, if you scroll down, there are multiple events that are available for JavaScript. For instance, the on-click event provides you the capability, if you click on any object in the form, you can enter your own code, either just pick up some code from from Alpha that provides you codeless JavaScript in here, that you can choose any of that will generate some JavaScript for you, or use different events. On change event, for instance, if there is a change of data, will be triggered, and you can use the same codes that Alpha provides you in here. Maybe let's go.
Jim, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Sure.
Jim, just one question from Ricardo, who was just asking, what's the difference between the live preview and the working preview that you were just looking at a moment ago?
Good question. We'll come back to this in just a second, but let's take a look at the live preview. Working preview is a form of preview that actually, live preview and working preview is a lot closer than it used to be. Working preview allows you to run the debugger here without having the server on. If we were to, this little green button here is the application server that's built into the Alpha IDE, which is also the same server that runs when you deploy a production server. This does not have to be on to run working preview. It used to be that you could only use the debugger in working preview. That has recently changed, and we can use live preview. Now, live preview actually gives us some other options. If we do a full preview, this actually publishes it. It does kind of a mini publish. It publishes this grid to a preview folder along with all of the supporting files like the CSS. And if there are things like session variables and other things, those all get used in live preview. They would not necessarily work in working preview.
I noticed also that there are choices for browsers at the bottom at the live preview.
There are. And this would allow us to launch this in multiple browsers.
Yeah, you can choose a different browser instead of the live preview in here by clicking.
So if we're doing a live preview, then we can go to any one of these browsers and ensure that all of your code works in all of the common browsers. And you can add whatever browsers you want to your system. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks.
So coming back to the JavaScript, this is an incredibly important piece of Alpha, because one of the most complex things you're going to have to get involved with is writing JavaScript. And I wish I could tell you it's easy to do, but it's not. But Alpha does make it easy for you. There are so many things that we do on a regular basis that Alpha has covered. So we can get into AJAX callbacks. Now, for those of you that might not be completely familiar with what an AJAX callback is, AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. The whole idea behind this is that rather than us going and getting a whole new page every time we have a query, we pinpoint the data we want, only get the data we need, and only refresh the section of the page that needs to be refreshed. This means we're sending less data across the network. This means we do away with all that flicker and waiting for the page to re-render. Obviously, the more complex the page, the longer that takes. So it really improves the user experience. And this is primarily what makes it possible for us to build interfaces on the web that behave like desktop applications. So we can do AJAX callbacks. If we want to write our own code, we can do inline JavaScript, completely write whatever code we want. We can open a component, a grid, a dialog component. We can create a custom component, page layouts, Google Maps, etc. We can do file and image uploads and downloads. We can drop an email piece of code that will send an email for us. We can do file and image uploads. Import and export to Excel, all the mapping. All of these things are there so that you don't have to go through all the work of writing code to do that. So for instance, if we had a button and we wanted to open another grid, we would simply open a grid, and we now have a property sheet that says, what grid do you want? How is it filtered? And we can filter it based on the current row that we're on. We can reorder that information. We can cache it if we so choose. We can change the style. We tell it where do we want this to go. Is it going to be a window, a div, or another pane in the tab user interface, which we'll show you in just a second. If we do it in a window, is it a modal pop-up where we have to deal with that and before we do anything else? Or is it modeless, that maybe we keep it popped up and we can do other things in the background? Or is it a drop-down? It can actually be a drop-down on the page. This generates a significant amount of JavaScript that would take hours to write if you had to do it by hand. But here's the good news. If you don't find the action that you need in Action JavaScript, you can go to a text mode and begin to write JavaScript yourself. But even here, Alpha can help you, because rather than you write native JavaScript, Alpha provides a number of methods that allow you to just plug in some values and it will generate the code for you. These are all helper methods. For example, let's say in a search, we don't want to have to click the search button every time. We want it to, as soon as we change a value, we want it to go ahead and resubmit the search. So we have a function that we get this is a placeholder that points to the grid, and we submit the search form. This will automatically, not only will it submit the search form, it automatically does the refresh. It takes care of everything for you. So let's see. We'll get rid of that. And of course, we have the whole list of JavaScript events. We can do things on click, on double click, mouse down, mouse up, key press. On blur and on focus means when you enter the field and when you leave the field, if a value changes in the field, and if you just select it. So a number of different events in this property sheet that allow us to fire the various things that we want. I'm going to jump down quickly here into, we're going to jump back down to the search, and again we have a number of different options that we can set for the search part of the grid. We may want to show the values vertically, we may want to show them horizontally. Then let's jump down into the detail view. The detail view is similar to the fields that we used here, but if you notice, we just got a handful of fields, and these are all just labels. We're just displaying them. But when we get down in the detail view, now we're using text boxes, in this case a drop-down. We've added some buttons. This is where we upload the logo. If I were to look on the on-click event, this is where we were just talking about. I've selected an image upload, action JavaScript. There's the configuration for the image upload. Again, a whole series of properties that allow you to make decisions about how your detail view behaves. In this case, in order to edit a row, we've selected to double click on that row. You can click on the hyperlink or just a single click on the row to open up that detail view. We have the ability to limit the delete, update, and insert options based on the security group the user belongs to. We can choose whether this detail view is shown on the grid, in the grid, on the page, whether it's again a modal or modeless pop-up window, into a div, and then we have some split right and split left options where the detail shows up on the right or left of the screen based on which record you're on. Again, that's all done with no coding on your part. We also provide some animation for transitions, so when this detail view is displayed, rather than just popping up suddenly on the screen, when we double click on this to look at it, it fades in. So it makes for a nice polished look, very professional look to your applications. Then there's a number of decisions that you need to make in regards to how do you update. When you refresh, do you let Alpha do it for you, or do you choose to refresh the entire page or just a single row? Some examples of where you use full page is, let's say you're ordering your data on a date, and you want the most current date at the top. So you'd set your order to be on date descending, so you have the newest date on top. This full page refresh will force the newest record you entered back to the top, given that you're storing the current date that the record was created. Alpha also provides some very strong write conflict, checking and ensuring that someone else has not changed data that you're working with. So if you were working on let's say you've opened a grid and you're showing data and you've been sitting there for 10 minutes, and in that 10 minutes someone else has updated information, when you go to try to start changing that data, the new information will automatically be populated. It will go and get that information for you. It will also ensure that it will give you a message if you're stepping on each other's updates, and then you can decide as a developer what to do with that if that were to happen. One of the most powerful things for a developer in Alpha is the ability to perform operations based on certain events firing. When we first started with Alpha back in version 9, Dave, you may recall this. How many events did we have in version 9?
Oh, I don't know, like 10 maybe?
Yeah, 8, 9, 10. That's all we had. As you can see, over the last 3 or 4 versions here, the events list has grown dramatically. And what that does is gives us, again, very fine-grained control whenever we want it. So we can generate code when the grid is executed, when it's first initialized, before the search, when the search is submitted in the can search. Some events we use on a regular basis is the can update, can insert, can delete. We want to go and do validation here. We might want to set some session variables. We might want to write some code that would go back to the database and perform some stored procedure or update some tables. Alpha gives us the ability to do all of that through all these events. In addition to that, we have a number of client-side events. Again, just a rather extensive list of events. I hope this, don't be overwhelmed by this. Again, this helps you to do things that you would have to write a lot of code for. So by understanding the event model here, for instance, after grid submit, we have some help for you here. If we wanted to look at what that event description was, it tells you it fires after the user has submitted edits to the grid part, and the server has processed the edits. So this will come back, and then we can begin using that same list of helper functions. We can then begin to write some JavaScript code here, including placeholders that tell us what's the current grid row number, what's the child object, a pointer to the grid object, etc. We can also write our own custom XBasic server-side functions, as well as our own custom JavaScript functions. Do you have something to add, Duran?
Yeah, that XBasic functions, usually you can call them when you do an AJAX call. You can write that's from the client into the server. So
right.
that capability enables you also to call a stored procedure and grab some data and display it right on the client side. It provides you tremendous flexibility in here, and the AJAX call itself functionality Alpha provides us to us. You don't need to write any line of code.
Correct.
Yeah, that's it in here.
Now we've got, I'm going to kind of shoot ahead here. We talked very briefly about containers, and one of those containers is a page layout, and I'm just going to show you very quickly how something like this is built. We talked before about building components. So in this case, we've got a grid component for documents, a grid component for the user details, and we've incorporated that into this page layout. And the page layout allows us to drop all of these pieces and combine all of these components onto a single page. The other thing that we have that we use extensively is the tab user interface. The tab user interface is what we see. We're going to go to here. Tab interface is this style of interface where we have buttons down to the left-hand side, or that could be the right-hand side. And rather than bring up page after page, what we do is we open up a new tab for the information. We want to look at the master sports list. It's here. And now we can very quickly navigate back and forth between the various pieces that we're having to deal with. If we're dealing with travel, some maintenance functions on the admin side for managing the various airlines in this application. And these, of course, can be drilled down into, maintained, etc. The tab user interface allows you to add buttons, images, links, whatever you need, static text like we have for the title for the admin here. As you can see, we can also build fairly complex either tabs or, in this case, accordions that regain your screen real estate as you hit each one. Again, all built in. You don't have to write any code for that. That's part of the function of the about those builders. So this allows you to create as many tabs as necessary all the way across. If it expands beyond the width of your screen, there are buttons that allow you to scroll back and forth on the left and right. This also gives you a home page, which allows you to either build your own page or build a grid incorporated in an A5W page, which can be shown here, or can point to some external website. You can point to Google or Alpha Software, or we recommend pointing to Alpha Software. And then, again, a whole series of properties that would be worthwhile to explore that manages the look and feel of your tab user interface. We talked a little bit about, we showed a sample of some reports, and I just wanted to give you a quick look at the designer here. Alpha's report designer is extremely good. This is an example of another invoice style of layout where we have the page header here, and then all of our detail information is in another band. Any of you that's used any kind of banded report writer will be right at home with this type of tool. If we were to do a preview on this, you can see that what the this generates an invoice layout. And
Yeah, you can.
Alpha's primary output is PDF, but you can choose other options, HTML, Word. You can export things to Excel using the report writer. Let's. I know we're getting short on time here, so I want to give some time for some questions. I did want to mention one thing, though. One of the things that we have noticed with so many of the developers is if you don't have a serious amount of database design experience, find somebody that can help you with that. Many of the problems that new developers wrestle with working with Alpha has to do with their database design. This is an example of one of the database modeling tools that we use that allow us to very quickly view, understand the layout, make changes to the structure as necessary, add new tables, etc., set relations, and all of that.
We can update also. We can also update the database directly from this data modeling tool. So basically, what you see, if it says register, it's an entity that consists with views, stored procedures, triggers, and so forth. Right. So if the application is the child of register, all of that, it will generate you the script for that automatically, and will create it all for you in the database level, so you don't need to spend a lot of time going back and forth into the database.
We strongly recommend looking at something like this if you are working with any kind of a team, so that you're not having to pass the entire database back and forth on a regular basis. You can just model it and work accordingly.
That also provides you the capability to look globally in the entire design of the database using data modeling tool.
Alpha also has a tremendous amount of capability in regards to third-party tool integration. We mentioned Fusion charts earlier. We're in the middle of doing some work using some other charting packages. This one happens to be high charts. And this is an example of an interface that we're working on to be able to very quickly define the parameters for a charting tool, build the various types of charts. Now, the reason we're using this tool is that this is all HTML5, and this allows us to run on the iPads and Androids. Again, it follows the same philosophy of Alpha, where we do everything in HTML5. We also are doing some work to embed the CK editor. Oh yeah, we got to refresh this. Oh, I closed down the other application, that's why. This is some of the newer stuff that we're working on here. There we go. So that's pretty much in a nutshell. Again, there's a number of other third-party things that we can attach to. There's a product called Email to DB, which will allow you to capture responses back from email, drop in your database. Alpha can interact with that as well. Alpha also provides the ability for you to instantiate .NET assemblies. So we've done some projects where we've had to call a web service from a billing company that processes the data, sends it back to us. We've also created some projects where we had two-way communication between PDF forms, whereas as we fill out as we open a PDF form, it's populated from the database. We make changes on the form, that writes back to the database. Again, that's all embedded in Alpha, so if there's some very complex calculations or functions that you need, you can use your .NET code in Alpha to do that. So I know we've gone very fast. We've covered a lot of different things, but we'd like to open it up for questions.
Excellent. Well, we do have some questions, so I'm going to start right at the beginning. And this has to do with the charting example that you gave up at the beginning. The question is to view a parameterized chart for a given customer, and what I think he means is if you're logged in as a particular person and you just want to see your data in a chart. The question is it better to use a report or a grid, or is there a better or easier way?
In this case, your application, of course, is going to dictate that. In this case, what we do is when a user logs in, we will collect all of his information, what company he's with, what permissions he has to access what data, and then those values are stored in a session variable. Those values are then available to all of your grids, your components. So in that case, we would then use those values as part of our query string that gets the data that populates this chart. Now, Fusion Charts is an XML-based chart, so we go and get the data, use XBasic to create the XML string that the chart needs to use to render. I'm hoping that answers your question. You can use a report and put the chart on the report. The problem is you don't get this kind of activity where I can move the slices. I can use it in a presentation kind of mode where I'm sitting and showing somebody this. It doesn't have any animation. Some of the
So if you want the full power, you're better off putting it into a grid rather than into a report. Is that
exactly
right?
Either grid or a dialogue.
Or a dialogue, right?
The report is very static, and even at that, there's a number of different ways to go about doing that. We tend to find that a lot of the .NET charting components are rather plain. However, we also know that much of the design lately has gone to a more flattened model. This particular control also is a Flash player control. Now, this company, when you if you do use their tool, if you're running on an iPad, this automatically reverts to HTML5. Now, when you do that, you don't have quite as much animation as you do with a Flash component, but it's still quite good. And that was that other example that I was showing you here. This is actually high charts. And this, although we've turned it off here, this does have slicing movements and some other things. And as you can see, as we mouse over, it displays the values. And if we selected some of these other options here, let me do this. If we were to generate a gauge, you'll notice that this is animated, and we're going to check a new value every few seconds to go get updated information. This is great for monitoring systems that you're looking at network usage, or maybe disk space, or could be a number of transactions coming across some device that you've connected to via USB. So in that case, again, depends on your need, but you're going to want to do it in a grid or a component if you want any kind of interactivity.
Right, great. This next one comes up a fair amount, which is how do you get around that port 80 issue when you try to start the server in Alpha 5?
Change it to port 81.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a conflict with IIS sometimes, so you need to change it to port 81 if IIS running on the same computer, for instance.
And you do that
actually,
in
there's a couple
application server settings.
Yeah,
Yes.
In the application server settings, if we were to look, in fact, I'll show you where that is here on the IDE. When we look at the web configuration for the application server, this is where we set our port.
So it's on the general tab.
Excuse me?
It looks like it's on the general tab then once you go
That's
in.
right, it's on
General
general
tab,
Yeah.
port 80. Change this. Some common ports to use are 80, 81, 82, 80, 80, 80, 81, 80. Those are all pretty safe ports to use. Now, the other thing that you can do, now we're talking about your local system.
That's right.
Now, one of the things that you can do that will help you track it down, the first thing you want to check is Skype. If you're a Skype user, Skype will automatically use port 80 and will conflict with Alpha. So if you go and just turn off the checkbox in Skype, let me see if I can relaunch that. It's a very happy sound. You go to your tools and options, advanced, and your connection. This, when you install Skype, use port 80 and 433 as alternatives. This is set by default. So uncheck this, and that is most likely what's holding your port 80 open locally. On a website, on the application server, what you're going to want to do, you've got a couple of options. You can either run multiple instances of the web server and run them on separate ports, or if your ISP will provide you with multiple IP addresses, you can run multiple instances or installations of Alpha Phi, each running on their own IP address and port 80.
And you can find more about that on the wiki if you search for running multiple application server instances as the
Correct.
search term. Great. Here's a pretty quick question, which is, what does that preview button in the top menu do? So in other words, when you're like on the grid builder,
Yeah, let's
for
go to
example,
the grid.
And you look up.
This one here?
Nope,
Actually,
up a little higher. Up a little higher, actually. So, although that is a good question too, because I don't think we covered
Yeah.
that. But
I mean, this, to be honest with you, I don't even use it anymore.
sure.
I think this, in a lot of situations, this really doesn't show much. I mean, it gives you the basic code, so you can look at what's happening here. And the layout will, part of the problem is some of our components are fairly complex, and sometimes they won't show, and sometimes take a long time to render like this. But all this is, there's nothing really functional here. It just kind of shows you the layout. If you notice, we've got placeholders instead of the images, because we're not in the live preview mode, which is actually, like I said, kind of a mini publishing thing, and we're not in working preview where it's kind of emulating the application server. So it just gives you a quick idea of what the layout is.
Great. Now, if you move up another line to the preview, that one exactly.
I believe that's the same, basically the same functionality. Again, wait. I think we've got two things going on here. This allows us to open in multiple browsers. I'm sorry, I see what you're talking about here. And based on our whatever we've got selected, we're going to open in Firefox. This opens this up in Firefox. If we were to select a different browser, we'll open it up in Chrome.
Excellent.
And
One
you're not going to
last
see this because
question.
it's on the other screen, but you
Actually,
get the
there
idea.
a few more have popped up, but someone was just asking about the database modeling tool. Is it included?
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's not. But can you tell us a little bit about the one that you use and maybe how much it costs and where you get it?
We use that. Actually, personally, I use it for the last 15 years. This is that product is called Xcase. If you go www.xcase.com, you can find the company. And that cost for the whole databases, it costs around $800. But the company is negotiable. So I'm not a salesperson. I just like the tool. I use it extensively for 15 years. This is extremely productive, and every time you start an application alpha, it's all started with the database. And database is highly recommended to design it properly, so all alpha will work nice and smooth.
One of the reasons we like this tool so much is that half the battle is just getting it into some visual format, so you can really wrap your mind around the whole application. And the fact that we can drill down into all of the properties, the fields, we can deal with indexes, we can deal with incoming and outgoing relationships, any alternate keys, triggers, all the constraints, procedures, etc., all in one place. And the fact that it's a model, we're not sitting there like we do in if we use in Microsoft's database tool, where as you make a change, it's instantly changed. We get to work with this, and once we're done, then we synchronize with the model. And we feel that if you're doing any kind of collaborative development, you should have a tool like this. From a price perspective, at $800, and you compare it to something like Toad or Irwin or some of these other data modeling tools, since we can use this one tool to connect to the various databases.
This tool also automates the process in terms. Let's assume you create a relation between the parent and the child. It's on the fly, will create you the foreign key, and also will generate the index to support that connection between the parent and the child. Of course, if you buy specific data modeling tool just for one database, then the price probably would be reduced. Again, we are not salespeople of that company. We love their product extensively, so we use it as well. Extremely highly recommended to use this product in conjunction to any database you guys may need to work on.
Right, I have another question here, and it has to do about scalability. If you're setting up a web app and it's got a lot of users, how well is the Alpha 5 server going to perform, and what can you do to make sure that it's reliable and robust?
Certainly. The alpha model for scaling is one of scaling out rather than scaling up. That's a That's just one way of saying that you need multiple servers behind a load balancer if you do have a high-use application. And I wish we could say that if X number of users will run on a server instance. But unfortunately, as you know, if somebody asks you, how many users can run on an installation, it's going to be, well, it depends. Alpha is imminently scalable to whatever size you need, and it's just going to be a matter of looking at your load, looking at how heavy your components are, how much data is being moved across the network, how many concurrent users do you actually have. We've seen systems that with a single instance will peak out at 30, 40 users, up to a server that'll handle 120, 200 users because the actual load is pretty light. We find that in most web applications, of course, there's a lot of think time. You're either doing searches or you're doing data entry. Searches, the search itself is usually pretty quick. You've got all this wait time in between the time you enter data in and the time it gets saved. So any one user usually doesn't put a huge load on the server. If you've got a heads down data entry type of environment where everybody's hammering away at it, then you might want to consider having multiple instances of the server. Of course, with the backends that we use, SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, you can throw just as much memory and as big a system as you want to support the data processing side of it.
Excellent. I have two questions, basically the same question, but from two different people. And I don't know if you have time to cover it, but people are asking a lot about security and the login, and basically how do you set up the login security for an application?
That's actually, we probably don't have time to go over it today. There's a lot to consider there. Just to give you a quick overview, Alpha is a role-based security access control system. And that's all that means is that each user can be assigned to multiple roles. Those roles can then be assigned in Alpha at let's take for the tabbed user interface, for instance. If you notice, we have an admin section here, and in the security groups, we can say that only administrators get to look at that particular button. So we completely manage the interface through these user groups. To set that up is multiple steps. We recommend storing your records in SQL Server, although the default setup is using DBFs, and then those have to be copied to the deployed server. But we also have a whole security package that we use with our applications that we offer to the people that we mentor, so you can manage your users on the web instead of managing in the Alpha interface and then having to deploy it. If you need more information on that, feel free to contact us, send an email, and we'll see what we can do to help you out.
Yeah, you can send email to customerservice@dfarber.com for additional questions, or go to the website www.dfarber.com for any questions you have regarding Alpha.